Hey everybody, this is a piece by Max Shachtman. It's from the 6th of January, 1947. It's titled Hugo Urbhans, Farewell to a German Comrade. Curious because Hugo Urbhans, I believe, was one of the first people within the Trotskyist or the left oppositionist movement. I don't even know if you could say it was a Trotskyist movement then, the left opposition. Who argued for something approaching a third camp position. So let's see. The Wikipedia says Hugo Urbhans lived from 1890 to 1946. Hugo Urbhans was a German communist revolutionary and politician. Hugo Urbhans was involved in the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, in the 1920s. Hugo Urbhans was jailed for his role in the Hamburg Uprising of 1923 and spent time on hunger strike. Hugo Urbhans was expelled from the KPD in the late 1920s and became a leader of the Leninbund, a left split from the KPD. For a time, Hugo Urbhans had links with Leon Trotsky, but they drifted apart over a number of issues, including Urbhans' development of a, quote, third campus position that the Soviet Union was no longer a workers' state. And I'm also going to read the Wikipedia for the Leninbund, or the Lenin League. The Lenin League, in German it's the Leninbund, was a German revolutionary socialist organization that was active during the late period of the Weimar Republic. Founded in 1928 by former left communist members of the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, the Leninbund experienced a number of splits over the years before going underground in the wake of the Reichstag fire and finally disappeared by the outbreak of World War II. The Lenin League was formed at the beginning of April 1928. The Lenin League's members, initially around 6,000, were mostly former Communist Party of Germany members who were excluded from the party after the, quote, ultra-left and the left wing were ousted by the leadership under Ernst Thälmann. Among them were several left communist members of the Reichstag and the Prussian Landtag and other prominent members of the party, such as Ruth Fischer, Arkady Maslow, Werner Scholem, Paul Schlecht, Hugo Urbhans, and Guido Heim. The founding members expressed their solidarity with the positions of the united opposition around Leon Trotsky and Grigory Zinoviev in the Soviet Union, and criticized various aspects of the policies of the Communist International and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, e.g. the Stalinist line of socialism in one country, and the alliance with the Kuomintang in China as, quote, revisionist deviations. Before the 1928 German federal election, the organization experienced the Leninbund's first major split when, with the exception of Hugo Urbhans, who led the Lenin League to the Lenin League's end, all of the Leninbund's prominent politicians left the organization, because of the surrender of Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev to the majority position in the USSR, and the participation in the elections being seen as premature. The result of the 1928 election, 0.26%, 80,230 votes, was therefore disappointing. The slow but steady process of disintegration soon became unstoppable, especially as the Communist Party of Germany violently attacked the Lenin League within the framework of the politics of the Third Period, where any non-communist workers' organization was labeled as fascist. Individual members like Fritz Szymanski joined the KPD, and others like Guido Heim joined the SPD. So the Lenin League shrank to around 1,000 members. The Lenin League remained important only in a few localities, in Dortmund, Neu-Isenburg, Brunsbüttel-Kug, and some cities of Brandenburg, such as Bernau and Rathenau, or Ratenov, where it was represented in the local parliaments. In the Rhineland and Berlin, some of Karl Korsch's supporters joined the organization after Karl Korsch's supporters' own structures were formally dissolved. In 1930, however, the truly Trotskyist wing around Anton Grilevitz split after controversies over the question of the reformability of the KPD and the Comintern and the character of Soviet foreign policy, and formed under the name of, quote, left opposition of the KPD. Recognizing early on the danger for the workers' movement of the growth of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Lenin League was involved in various attempts from 1930 onwards to build a united front of the SPD and KPD workers' parties against fascism, which only succeeded in intensified cooperation with other small left-wing organizations, such as the Communist Party of Germany opposition, which was like the right opposition that kind of wasn't particularly critical of anything happening, to my understanding at least, so correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, by all means, but to my understanding, the Communist Party opposition wasn't particularly bothered by developments within the Soviet Union, but rather bothered by the policies of the Comintern. But I suppose they probably would become more critical of the because they were supposedly loyal to Bukharin, and Bukharin definitely had criticisms of what happened, or at least like had a history of the criticisms of the kind of breakneck industrialization and the crushing of the NEP and the Smitchka in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So maybe they had more of a critique of what happened within the Soviet Union than I believe they do, but I'm not sure. Anyway, let me repeat that sentence because I fucked it up by yapping. Excuse me, Jesus Christ. Recognizing early on the danger for the workers' movement of the growth of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, the Lenin League was involved in various attempts from 1930 onwards to build a united front of the SPD and KPD workers' parties against fascism, which only succeeded in intensified cooperation with other small left-wing organizations such as the Communist Party of Germany opposition, KPO, and Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, SAPD. After several bans on the Lenin-Bund's press in 1932, the newspaper Volkswille, initially published daily in 1928, 3 times a week from 1928 to 1930, weekly from 1930 to 1932, and every 2 weeks until the final ban, and the theoretical organ, the Fahne des Kommunismus, every 2 weeks. The organization, the Lenin-Bund, had to go underground after the Reichstag fire in 1933. Unlike other small left-wing organizations, however, the Lenin League failed to establish a functional foreign leadership. A group of exiles led by Hugo Urbhans existed in Stockholm, or centralized illegal structures. Regional Lenin League resistance groups were active in various regions such as Hamburg, Thuringia, or the Ruhr area, often in cooperation with other leftist organizations. After the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the Lenin-Bund's traces were lost. All right, so I think we've got enough to just read this piece, which is short, but I hope that was useful. It's useful to me, at least. From Stockholm, Sweden comes this is Max Shachtman's piece now. From Stockholm, Sweden comes the sorrowful news that Hugo Urbhans died in exile of heart failure. Hugo Urbhans was born to a country family near Hamburg, Germany. When Hugo Urbhans reached manhood, Hugo Urbhans took up the profession of country school teacher. Drafted into the army in 1914, Hugo Urbhans became a confirmed enemy of German imperialism and was one of the first to join the revolutionary socialist group of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, the Spartacus League. A militant with tireless energy, devotion, and tremendous will to struggle, Hugo Urbhans soon won the respect and support of the Hamburg workers among whom he carried on his activities. His impatience with the hesitancy of the party leadership in the crucial period following the war in Germany assured him a strong position of leadership among the Hamburg militants, who were in many ways the vanguard of the German Socialist Revolution. Hugo Urbhans acquired national prominence in the German Communist movement by the part Hugo Urbhans played in organizing a left-wing opposition to the party leadership during and after the notorious Kapp Putsch launched by the monarchist reaction, in which the Communist Party leadership in Berlin had followed a calamitous course of indifference toward the outcome of the struggle around Kapp & Co. And this is all in italics, so I'm going to read it twice. In the revolutionary situation of 1923, the militants of Hamburg were the only militants to organize an uprising. In this hopeless uprising, doomed by this uprising's isolation and the lack of preparation by the leadership, Hugo Urbhans was perhaps the outstanding figure. Hugo Urbhans was arrested by the government, and after a trial in which he conducted himself with courageous sincerity, Hugo Urbhans was sentenced to several years' imprisonment, from which Hugo Urbhans was released in 1925 by one of the periodical government amnesties. And that was all in italics, so I'll read it again. In the revolutionary situation of 1923, the militants of Hamburg were the only ones to organize an uprising. In this hopeless uprising, doomed by its isolation and the lack of preparation by the leadership, Hugo Urbhans was perhaps the outstanding figure. Hugo Urbhans was arrested by the government, and after a trial in which Hugo Urbhans conducted himself with courageous sincerity, Hugo Urbhans was sentenced to several years' imprisonment, from which Hugo Urbhans was released in 1925 by one of the periodical government amnesties. Resuming Hugo Urbhans' activity in the Communist Party, Hugo Urbhans became one of the most important figures in the new left-wing leadership of the party. Represented by Ruth Fischer, A. Maslow, who was found dead in Havana 5 years ago under suspicious circumstances, the late Ernest Thälmann, Arthur Rosenberg, who died recently in New York, Werner Scholem, who died in the Nazi concentration camp of Buchenwald in 1941, and others. Most of these left-wingers gave their support to the Trotsky-Zinoviev opposition to the bureaucracy in Russia. While many capitulated to Stalin, Hugo Urbhans did not. For a while, Hugo Urbhans became the leader of the Trotskyist movement in Germany, the head of the Lenin League, or the Lenin Bund, and the editor of the Lenin League's newspaper, Volkswille, Will of the People. New section, Conflict with Trotsky. Unfortunately, shortly after Trotsky's banishment to Turkey, Urbhans came into conflict with the leader of the Russian opposition. To begin with, over the question of the position the revolutionists should take in the near war that broke out between Russia and China in 1929 over the Chinese Eastern Railway. The conflict between the two widened and deepened. Urbhans, from a rejection of the idea of defending Russia in the clash with China, began to develop theories about Russia as a sort of hybrid state, half capitalist, half socialist. Not an outstanding theoretician, Hugo Urbhans was nevertheless seeking confusedly a way out of the growing dilemma between the traditional definitions applied to Russia and the distinctly untraditional real development of Stalinist society. Urbhans was not very successful, and Trotsky was able to blow the sands from under Hugo Urbhans' feet, with a few articles which appeared in pamphlet form in all the modern languages. Cut off from the mainstream of the Marxist movement, which Trotsky represented, Hugo Urbhans' Lenin League was soon disintegrated and played no further role in the German movement. And this is in italics, so I'll read it twice. After 1933, Urbhans, like so many others, was forced to flee the Nazi terror. Hugo Urbhans settled in Sweden, learned the language of the country, acquired Swedish citizenship, married a Swedish girl, and continued whatever activities were permitted by the misery of exile, mainly in the form of articles. Hugo Urbhans contributed frequently to the Swedish trade union press. The tiny group of political friends around Hugo Urbhans never broke out of their isolation. After 1933, Urbhans, like so many others, was forced to flee the Nazi terror. Hugo Urbhans settled in Sweden, learned the language of the country, acquired Swedish citizenship, married a Swedish girl, and continued whatever activities were permitted by the misery of exile, mainly in the form of articles he contributed frequently to the Swedish trade union press. The tiny group of political friends around him never broke out of their isolation. When the Second World War broke out, Hugo Urbhans hoped to come to the United States. It proved to be unfeasible. Hugo Urbhans lived the last days of Hugo Urbhans' exile in the only country where Hugo Urbhans was able to take refuge from the Brown Plague. New section, Soldier for Freedom. Hugo Urbhans' honest political opponents, which excludes the Stalinists who hated Hugo Urbhans poisonously, always respected Hugo Urbhans' fearlessness, Hugo Urbhans' singleness of socialist purpose, the purity of Hugo Urbhans' character. Hugo Urbhans was of a generation that, for the most part, rotted to its heart by the corrosive acids of decadent Stalinism and decadent reformism. Of that generation, Hugo Urbhans was one of the very, very few to survive as a revolutionist. We say it who had not inconsiderable political We say it who are not inconsiderable political differences with Urbhans. And this is in italics. Only a handful, almost literally, of the men of the Spartacus League, of the great revolutionary days following the First World War, lived to our time. Some of this handful, like Wilhelm Pieck, present leader of the German Communist Party, became loathsome creatures of Stalin. Hugo Urbhans was one of the honorable few who preserved a noble revolutionary tradition. According to Hugo Urbhans' lights, and as Hugo Urbhans understood it, we bow in respectful honor of the memory of this soldier for freedom. I'm going to read it one more time. Only a handful, almost literally, of the men of the Spartacus League, of the great revolutionary days following the First World War, lived to our time. Some of this handful, like Wilhelm Pieck, present leader of the German Communist Party, became loathsome creatures of Stalin. Hugo Urbhans was one of the honorable few who preserved a noble revolutionary tradition, according to his lights and as he understood it. We bow in respectful honor to the memory of this soldier for freedom. And that's the end of the piece. Thank you for listening.